Police can wiretap your phone at any time. Here's how.
Who's heard of a Stingray device? It's basically a box small enough to sit in a police van. And if you're in the area and you're making a phone call, what the Stingray is doing is it's telling the cell phone, hey, I'm the cell phone tower. Connect to me. Once your phone is connected to the Stingray catches basically a serial number for your phone. And once they've got the cell phone number, the police go to the cell phone company and say, what's their name and address, and figure out who that person is. These devices can be configured to not only identify who the person is, but they can basically work like a mobile wiretap. The cops aren't allowed to go around wiretapping people unless you get a court order under Title III, but this technology is being hidden from the courts, from judges even. And it turns out that the Baltimore police admitted that they had actually used the thing hundreds, maybe even 1,000 times since 2007 without making any reference or indication in a police report.
When any baby is born in the United States, their heel was pricked by the nurse, and that little baby heel was pressed up against a card like this, and blood spots were taken from your child. There are benefits to it, but the question is, what happens to that blood after it's used for the purpose for which it is taken? There was a cold case from 1996, dormant for years, until some bright guy at the state police decided to see if his hunch about a suspect was correct. They had a suspect. That suspect had a son. The son had nothing to do with this case. But he decided to call the Department of Public Health and ask for the suspect's son's blood spot. And from the suspect's son's blood spot, they determined that the person who committed this crime was a male relative of this 8-year-old who wasn't even born at the time the crime was committed. Then they used that information to type up a search warrant and get a warrant for our client's blood. A clear end run around the Fourth Amendment.
The NYPD has a tactic that they call celebrity comparison. What does this mean? It means exactly what it sounds like. The NYPD was investigating a super serious crime of a couple beers that were stolen from a CVS. And this is the CCTV footage they had. Not very good. They run it through face recognition because no minimum photo quality standards, and they get nothing. One of the detectives is like, you know who this guy looks like? Woody Harrelson. So they use the super technical advanced tool of Google Images, and they find an extremely high quality photo of Woody Harrelson to run through their face recognition system. They got some results. The person they landed up investigating and arresting for this crime was the 9th person in the candidate list. But that means the algorithm actually thought 8 other people looked more like Woody Harrelson than the person they landed up arresting. The premise of face recognition is that it's a biometric. You are fundamentally breaking the concept of your system if you can substitute people's biometrics for each other.
So at the crime scene, you can imagine that things can transfer very easily. I had a case once where it was a cold day in Florida. The defendant was sleeping naked in this bed, and they pulled him out, handcuffed him naked on his front lawn, and started searching the house looking for a gun. And they found a gun, and what did they do? They pulled it out and plopped it right on the bed where this guy was just sleeping, butt naked. And you think to yourself, what thought process was going through your mind? And they're taking pictures, and they're gonna render it safe, even though they just were digging around in all his stuff with their gloves on. You know, this stuff happens, and especially in states like Florida, where we have a lot of law enforcement, a lot of different jurisdictions, and a lot of police officers on the front side that don't have the understanding of how DNA can transfer and how common that is. You know, you really have to consider that in every case.
Your phone is always listening, but your phone's also a snitch. All of you are going to feel far more sane when I explain to you how Bluetooth technology is actually interfering with your daily life. How many of you have gone to Target and maybe stared at the 70-inch TV for a minute too long, and then you go home later that day, you pop on the grams, and suddenly there it is, 70-inch TV. You're like, it's meant to be, right? Like, how did they know to give me that targeted advertisement, right? Well, the truth is that in Target, there are these little Bluetooth low energy beacons, and they are listening and they are receiving it. So your Bluetooth has a unique identifier. Later, Target's gonna go through data brokers and figure out who that is, and that's how they're gonna figure out how to target you later, but that's how you start to get those targeted advertisements.
Fingerprinting was supposed to be like the ultimate in terms of identification evidence. Fingerprints are formed at birth, they are unique, the patterns are different among twins, stuff like that. And that was how FBI examiners testified for many, many decades. They testified that this was an infallible discipline, that there was a 0 error rate if it was conducted properly by a trained person like an FBI examiner. And so there's this fundamental question which fingerprint examiners often don't really explain in court, which is how much information from your print do you actually leave on a substance such that it can be later examined? More than half of prints are examined and found to be useless, not usable for analysis. And so that alone gives you a very different picture of the quality of this evidence. Most of the time what's lifted at the scene doesn't have enough information to be relied on in any way. Just because people in general, or some people might be good in this discipline, doesn't mean that the person at your local crime lab has really good training and experience that translates into them being accurate.
You may already be in a database that the government's already looking at. Think about this. You move into an apartment and they give you an IP address that was maybe assigned to somebody else a week before, a month before, 6 months before. They could very well be in this database, so law enforcement thinks you're a bad person. You're already on their hit list, and all you did is get a brand new cable modem with a new IP assigned to it because they recycle IPs. There's only so many IPs in the world, and there's a big auction every year. Who gets what? There is nothing illegal about peer-to-peer software programs. They're used all over the world for all types of things. But if you're on peer-to-peer, they start monitoring your traffic. Just because your IP was in an old database of historical information from somebody that they believe was distributing contraband.
When you call 911, the FCC requires cell companies by law to be able to locate your phone, whether you have a GPS chip or not. Location accuracy is supposed to be within 50 feet 60% of the time, and 150 feet 90% of the time. It's not that accurate on average. When you call 911, you're voluntarily giving up your location. You're saying, find me, it's an emergency. However, when law enforcement activates the 911 system because they think you're a danger of public safety or you're a fugitive, they can track your phone without a warrant. Now, they're supposed to provide a warrant within 24 hours. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So I would always challenge that.
We want to know and have an idea of what the next phase of digital evidence will be. I don't know if you've heard of this yet, but the Chinese social credit system. You will be judged and scored on your value as a citizen. Your traditional inputs of income, your tax payments, but we also have things such as adherence to traffic rules, payment for public transportation, volunteer activity, interactions with other internet users, and also your shopping habits. What are you purchasing? You, based upon your social credit score, that could be banned from flying or getting the train, you get your dogs taken away, which has actually happened, being publicly named as a bad citizen, including being flashed upon billboards. They do this and are able to do this because of the hyperconnectivity of our world today. They collect this data from private companies and through government services, smart home statistics, preferred newspaper shopping history, and dating behavior. And you combine that with over 20 million AI security cameras, 200 million CCTV or closed-circuit television systems throughout China, watching people everywhere. This is not just in China, right? If you go to Lower Manhattan, we have the domain awareness system, 6,000 video cameras in New York City that have this facial recognition technology. The companies don't work on the same level with the government as they do in China, but the technology is here.
Anybody ever see Minority Report? You can go check out on the screen, and it's going to tell you who is going to commit a crime, so you can go get them. Spoiler alert, if you didn't see the movie, turns out it didn't work so well. But this used to be the kind of thing that we thought of as like sci-fi fantasy. Not so much anymore. Artificial intelligence is coming to conclusions about where you need to patrol, who needs to be patrolled, and we've accelerated how fast we can do it. There's a lot of policing tools that use artificial intelligence. One is risk assessment tools. This is the question of future dangerousness. And so they have a sample online of what one of these looks like. So the first thing is demographics, right? How old are you? The second part is criminal history. Then they go to education, employment, and then they come up with a total score. These things sound like maybe categories of information that might help, but really are proxies for race and class. They say risk assessment tools will create consistency. But here's the thing, if consistently black people are deemed more dangerous and white people are deemed less dangerous at the same rate all the time, it's consistent, but it's definitely not fair.
With ballistics, you have to understand, how does a gun work? We as defense lawyers can't be afraid of it. Ballistics are now being challenged by defense lawyers all over the country. The first thing that the firearm examiner will look for when they're doing a test fire and comparing it, they look for what class is it. And if they can eliminate right from the get-go, if it's a different class, they say, we're done with that examination, we'll go to the next thing. The second part you hear is subclass characteristics, and there may be inadvertent or accidental marks that are made across a batch or batches of firearm. Well, you may have a two-mark expert looking when they do the comparison microscope, and they may call that an individual characteristic when yet they don't know how many guns have that same exact marking. If the expert can't say that this is definitively an individual characteristic, it may be a subclass characteristic. That's an area of cross-examination.
When you lock and unlock your phone, you're actually, whether you know it or not, decrypting and unencrypting your phone. What it does is it takes plain text, and when you lock it, converts it to what they call ciphertext, plain text being readable, ciphertext being unreadable. Judges like to say this is like unlocking a box. It's not like unlocking a box. It's like unlocking a box and then translating all of the contents. And a passcode or a password is just the contents of your mind. The contents of your mind should be protected. Generally, the courts are protecting an alphanumeric passcode that reveals the contents of your mind under the Fifth Amendment. But then we look at facial IDs and biometric locks, and they're a lot less likely to be protected because they're generally viewed to be a physical act. However, here's a case for you out of the Northern District of California. Biometric features serve the same purpose of a passcode, which is to secure the owner's content, pragmatically rendering them functionally equivalent. I think that's right.
According to the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, online romance scams account for the highest amount of financial losses to victims when compared to other online crimes, 230 million. That's the losses associated with online romance scams. But the interesting thing here is that relationships themselves, they involve monetary exchanges. If you're in a relationship with someone and they need money for a utility bill, you're usually going to help them out if you're able to do so. And so if someone is charged with fraud as a result of a victim, let's say, discovering that person wasn't who they said they were, it could be very difficult to demonstrate that the money wasn't given as a gift because they are in a relationship. Was there really an expectation of repayment? Also, there could be complications when the people involved live in different countries or even different states because the laws governing these different places are different. As you can see, it can get pretty complicated proving that harm or damages exist or happen.
There was a robbery at an ATM vestibule. They have a possible suspect. We have a video of the robbery on a surveillance camera that's placed at the entrance. What we do, we actually break down video into individual photographs, and we'll do something that's referred to as photogrammetry, essentially the scientific analysis of those photos to determine things such as height and posture. And then we can also reconstruct how the individual walked and how the suspect walked to see if they are consistent with one another. In this case, the perpetrator has what's referred to as a stiff gait. Basically means they're not bending their knees as much when they're walking. The defendant actually demonstrated an increased amount of knee flexion, so essentially the exact opposite of a stiff gait. Perpetrator is approximately a 1/4 inch taller than the suspect, and the perpetrator's base of support is approximately 2 inches wider than that of the suspect. So essentially the perpetrator is not the suspect. That's how we would conduct identification analysis.
They don't understand that Snapchat, things that are erasable, live in servers forever. They think they can get rid of their communication by hitting delete. Here's what you told the investigators. John just showed up at your dorm room. You found it a little weird. Those were your words. Well, you were the one that sent a Snapchat to John. 11:25. You told John, we're hanging, come by Andrews 302. That was your dorm room. You were the one that initiated the conversation with John. John didn't just show up. John showed up because you invited him. You see, we've made this story into something that lives. It's not just you told him you thought it was weird, but it really wasn't weird. It's a lot more diabolical than that. There is no way you can write on a Title IX interview form you thought it was weird when really what's happening is you invited him.
If you rent a car and you plug your phone in, it's not advisable because of all the data that it sucks down. Every vehicle that is rolling off the production lot has an infotainment system in it, and those are computers very much like the cell phones that we carry in our pockets and have been a unique focus of Fourth Amendment law and of privacy law in the country. Text messages, medical data, sucked down into a rental car for the world to have access to. And what's different about these systems is that, they contain massive amounts of highly personal data. I know of no manufacturer that has a password protection on these devices. And the fact that there is no mechanism to safeguard your privacy is deeply troubling.
Evidence is collected by the crime scene technicians, which are oftentimes not scientists, and so they're not necessarily thinking about the crime scene the way a scientist might. Was the evidence preserved? Was there potential for contamination? This is a case that involved forensic botany, and the claim was that a grave had been pre-dug and had been left open long enough for it to fill with a pile of leaves that bodies were then placed on top of. That expert, who was a local university professor who wasn't a forensic scientist, had testified very specifically in the original trial that this bed of leaves implied that the grave had been open at least 24 hours. Well, I have no idea if what they did is correct, because when these leaves were collected, they were left for a few days and they molded. And then by the time the fellow analyzed them, the leaves had disintegrated, and without any of the leaf matter, it becomes very hard to actually review that data to say what was going on. And the evidence wasn't maintained, so it couldn't be retested. If the science isn't done right, it shouldn't be allowed. But even after a Daubert hearing, this testimony still was allowed in court.
We've all seen those episodes on the TV show where they'll zoom in on the mirror or the victim's eyeball and get the reflection. Well, obviously, unrealistic. There is a difference between enhancement and something else called clarification. Enhancement is judgment-based. Enhancement is turning knobs on a TV or a monitor to make something brighter, darker. Clarification is more like solving a Sudoku puzzle. If everything you do leaves a telltale artifact, can't you work backwards and build back the data that was there? You've got this scene, very hard to see what's going on. The camera not only was low resolution, but it wasn't in perfect focus. So now watch this. You can refocus after the fact, and most people don't realize that's possible. Another one is motion. So here we have a problem where picture's been taken of this truck and we're trying to see the license plate. Well, if you look to the right of the license plate, you see light, kind of a question mark shape. So if we bend the pixels back through it, it goes from this to that. If math creates the problem, math can solve it.
Anything, pretty much, that connects to a cell tower, that information is going to be kept by Google. A geofence is a virtual perimeter for a real-world geographic area. And so any cell phone that appears within this parameter, law enforcement are going to scoop up that data. They have actually used data from these geofence warrants to target people who have not actually been the perpetrators of crime. There was a man in Arizona who was charged with murder and held in custody for a long time while they figured out that, no, it wasn't his cell phone at the crime scene. It was some dude that he knew who actually did the murder, and one time, however many weeks prior to the murder, logged into his Gmail on this other dude's phone. His alibi was actually where he was instead of at this crime scene, with this other guy who happened to have his Google credentials logged in on his phone. But this mix-up and this assumption that the officers can jump to can really ruin people's lives.
Now, why does Google care about our location information? Because they want to make the world a better place. No, I'm just kidding. They want to make money. So in 2009, Google launched something called Sensor Vault. And Sensor Vault was the idea of how can we sell location-based advertisements in order to make money. And if you look at how much their revenue has changed since 2009 when they began doing this, it's obscene the amount of money they make. So in general, there are going to be 4 ways that Google tries to determine your location. Good old-fashioned cell towers. It also uses Wi-Fi. The third one is going to be Bluetooth. And then finally, and the least common, is GPS. But what Google told us is that in the United States, a search warrant is required to compel Google to disclose data stored in the user's location history. How many of you have been the subject of a Google geofence warrant? Everyone in this room. Because every time Google runs one of these warrants, all of our location information is searched at that time. So we've all been part of this. And again, a lot of this is based on their ability to sell location-based advertisements.
3 common myths about fentanyl. It's not what you think. People love to talk about how the problem is the border. The reality is that fentanyl comes from China. It's coming through international airports, and only 0.02% of all individuals found with drugs on the Mexico border had fentanyl last year. The second myth about fentanyl, briefly touching fentanyl will kill you. Absolutely not true. Even inhaling a little bit of fentanyl does not kill you. And if you actually look at the statistics, they could not find a single case of a police officer who reported being poisoned by fentanyl after encountering the drug that was confirmed by toxicology reports. So the next myth is that all fentanyl-related substances are the same. Benzylfentanyl has absolutely no effect whatsoever on your mind or your body.
forget to put your phone in airplane mode on the airplane and you lose service after a while, it's because cell towers point down. They don't point up. So as soon as you get above the cell towers, you have no more service. All you're doing then is aggravating the pilot. How much area does a cell tower cover? Well, out in the Midwest, where you have more cows than people, you can cover a lot of area with a single cell tower because cell tower placement is based on not population, but subscriber density for a carrier. So if you have a highly subscribed area of AT&T, you'll see a lot of AT&T towers. If I have 2 cell towers and they're 3 miles apart, the maximum range for any cell tower in that area is going to be about 1.5 miles because they interfere with each other. So how far can a cell phone be from a tower and still make a call? 22 miles towards AT&T or T-Mobile, about 35 miles towards Sprint Verizon. But again, it's limited by geography, by subscriber density. So if you're in downtown Chicago trying to make a phone call, what's happening is the radio waves are not coming directly to their phone. They're bouncing off of buildings and eventually getting to you. That's called multipathing.
ShotSpotter is meant to be an investigative tool to determine whether or not sound impulses similar to gunshots were fired to direct police resources. It's placed in certain public spaces, sometimes placed on private property with the permission of the homeowner, landowner. And it's a microphone that can listen all of the time. And right now what we're relying on is the discretion, the goodwill of whomever purchases the technology to only use it for those purposes. It isn't going to be just capturing gunshot fire. There's many other things, especially in a dynamic urban environment, that are going to be picked up by the microphones and potentially flagged for law enforcement.
You will be able to hear people talking, dogs barking, trash cans. It is a live working audio, always on. There's been obviously issues with privacy. ACLU has gotten involved.
It sounds, maybe a little bit dramatic, but we really are in an Orwellian state where they have those capabilities.
The reality is, ShotSpotter is a for-profit company. Their customer base is the police department. You see this red box? It says publish or dismiss. These people are the ones that get to decide whether it goes on to 911 to dispatch or whether to dismiss it. And if it's dismissed, 911 never sees it. ShotSpotter will maintain and keep the data, but 911 is never told. You'll actually have police officers tell you that they know that there's a lot of problems with it. Once they install, they never come back and test again. When they're using this type of technology in urban environments, and you have trees and buildings, the way the sensors are picking up the audio is going to be affected. ShotSpotter's not telling you who the shooter is. ShotSpotter's not telling you, why they shot. You don't know anything. That's why the propaganda of ShotSpotter is a bunch of baloney.
What's a Fifth Amendment violation? What do we need? We need it to be compelled. We need it to be testimonial. We need it to be self-incriminating because no person shall be compelled in a criminal case to be a witness against himself or herself. But here's a little foregone conclusion stuff because it could come up. This is a horrible case out of New Jersey, but it's something the government may press. This guy, Robert Andrews, refuses to provide his cell phone password, and they say, well, it's a foregone conclusion. What does this mean? It means that they're saying that the government had substantially enough information beforehand. That it was a foregone conclusion they had the information anyway. This is one of the dumbest ways to get screwed in these cases as far as I'm concerned, because if they have the information substantially anyway, why do they need my client's device?
The fact that we have these body-worn cameras has created more accountability among law enforcement.
The ways that officers will usually frustrate the camera's recording ability is where they'll place the camera on their person. They'll tend to put it inside their jacket. And if there's movement or a lot of movement, the lapel of the jacket will cover the lens. So you don't see anything, or you see a small sliver of the video over here. They tend to like to cover the lens up when they're turning it on or off, so you lose some of the video there. The 30-second pre-roll is actually very helpful.
Because of that function, we're able to capture what happens prior to when they turn the camera on.
I'm sure they're well aware of it now, but in the beginning they weren't aware of it, so they would think that as soon as you turned it on, it would start recording. Not all body-worn cameras have that pre-roll, and just like Jeff said, it's not really recording audio until they click that.
5 things you probably didn't know about computers. Criminal Defense Edition. Number 1.
Accessing the dark web doesn't make your guy guilty. It contains lots of illegal websites, but there's lots and lots of legal stuff. Websites with possibly distasteful content, but not illegal content.
Number 2.
Photographs have got what's called EXIF metadata. It'll often have the latitude and longitude where the image was taken.
Number 3.
There's a record of what USB devices have been attached to the computer. We can show usually the make and model, often a couple of dates associated with it, but we can't show what was copied from the computer.
Number 4.
So there's something called jump lists. Jump lists show files that have actually been accessed. Just because something is on the computer doesn't mean it was opened and used. It could be there from possibly malware.
Number 5.
Webmail, once the data is deleted, if you delete your Gmail, it's gone off their servers within a month.
This is a case that actually happened here in Las Vegas. The body was found in an area behind the hotel here on the Strip. The body had several injuries, stab wounds. There's fresh blood everywhere. The forensic pathologist originally said death occurred just very early before the body was found. The suspect is Kristen Lobato. The reason that she was found a suspect, she had been attacked a month before the body was found. And she had a pocket knife. She tried to defend herself and probably injuring the person in the groin area. She told a friend. When this friend heard about the homeless guy being found dead in Las Vegas without his penis, she decided to call the police and say, well, you know what, my friend told me this story. So the police went and talked to Kristen Lobato. And he said, yes, I was attacked a month before. That was taken as a de facto confession. And that's how she was charged. It turns out that Lobato has an alibi. The body was found at 10 p.m. From 7 a.m. to 10:15 p.m., it couldn't be Kirsten. So what happened is that the PMI was changed to 1 to 12 hours. So she was found guilty, she was sentenced, but lately there were 3 forensic entomologists that says the absence of insects in this body, and it was tested for toxicology, can only be explained by the fact that this body was here for a very short period of time. So the flies did not have time to find it. She was released after 15 years.
I had somebody that bought a pallet load of computers from Defense Reutilization to tinker with because his son liked rebuilding computers. Plugged them in, ran them. Little did he know that was actually distributing child of all things, and he took the heat for that. We proved that he didn't do it. They allowed me to look at the computers before they charged him, and I was really confused. I said, this is your computer from the FBI? And they said, no, it's not. I said, yeah, it is. I said, this is licensed to the FBI. Here's the Windows registration. And we pull it up, they're confused, they look at it, and sure enough, he actually bought a prior FBI computer, and it was running a bait server distributing child. The case did not go well for the prosecution because law enforcement did not examine it. They just simply ran a tool that says it has a bunch of child on it, and they ran with it. They thought they had a big fish, and they did not.